and thank you for joining us today for our Microsoft 365 ecosystem session with Infused Innovations. I'd like to welcome you all to please be sure to use the chat box to ask any questions, share your feedback, comments with the group. Additionally, please make sure your mics are muted so that we don't hear any background noise during the presentation. And also, as a reminder, today's session will be recorded. So I'd like to go ahead and kick it off. Dave Marble, who will go ahead and get us started. Dave?
Thank you, Minamota. Welcome, everyone. We could make this the title of this people you should know. Like, you know, if you're in the technical community, you know, as long as I've been in and in the local area, you know, you need to know these guys. You need to know Jeff Wilhelm, and many of you, you know, do know Jeff from, you know, being in the circles that we all run in. You know, Jeff, you know, I always look at it as he won you know, a C-suite award, you know, at PBN, you know, he's won the Tech 10 award at the Tech Collective kind of thing. And you know, and that is not unfounded. There are tremendous reasons. And Jeff has been somebody that that we have worked with over the years and continue to work with as we speak. On various, and it's always about something innovative. What is the front end, you know, the front edge of this of the spear? What are we working on now? And in a minute I'll introduce Joel, but Jeff, you know, Jeff runs Infused Innovations, and you know, we've been working with them on just the internal stuff, like what are we doing as an enterprise, you know, in things like Microsoft 365 and things like that. But we're also working with Jeff on some really innovative projects in the wireless community, looking at the next generation of private LTE and CBRS technologies. And Jeff just has a wealth of knowledge, and he also contributes back, you know, into a town, North Kingstown, my old hometown, where OSHEAN is located, and helping the town understand things like enterprise security and some of the things that they're trying to get done at the municipality level. So, so I'm going to let Jeff take it away, and either Jeff or myself can introduce Joel when Joel comes on. So actually, the only thing I'll say next is, and this is a commercial for OSHEAN, right? Blatant, shameless commercial says, where we talk about cloud all the time, and what we want people to understand is that there's a network between here and there, and sometimes people forget that, and they do a lot of analysis of what the cloud can do, but not all of the things that you need to do to provide secure payload transactions that go to the cloud. And OSHEAN can help out a lot with its membership and the kinds of things that we do in that area. So Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, David, and thanks so much for that kind introduction. It's always been a pleasure working with you and the team at OSHEAN, and frankly, many of the OSHEAN members that are on today, we've had great experiences with over the years. And you know, it's nice to see some familiar faces on the call. I'll be bouncing my eyes between the chat. I have a couple polls that I'm going to probably throw out just to sort of gauge the audience a little bit. I've got some obviously slides, and the goal here is not to PowerPoint people to boredom. It's really for Joel and I to treat this as a conversation, and one that everyone should feel free to participate in. You know, heck, my 5-year-old might walk into the room in the middle and join the conversation too. So the more the merrier. There's also a few people on from my side that'll probably be keeping an eye on the chat. So feel free to ask questions, anything that comes up that you want more information about. You know, happy to dive into things in a little bit more detail. But I also know that There's different skill sets on the call today. There's different familiarities with these tools. I'm going to try to avoid, too much jargon and keep it a little bit high level. And I'll also just say, David's point about sort of the network being such a critical piece to delivering these services, it almost disappears into the background at times because there's so much focus on user experience and capabilities and all that kind of stuff that we almost take for granted having a really good, robust, secure network like OSHEAN provides to so many of the community. So anyway, I'll jump right in, and you know what? Well, let's introduce Joel too, because since we're going to be treating this as a conversation, we're going to want to make sure that that everyone knows who he is right off the bat. David, do you want to give him an intro, or do you want me to? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Why don't you do it, Jeff? Go ahead.
Sure. Or Joel, would you like to introduce yourself?
We could do that. He knows himself better than we do.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd love to hear the nice things you're going to say about me, Jeff.
You want me to? I'd be happy to. So Joel is an emerging technologies and unified collaboration expert here at Infused Innovations. He's worked with large EDUs on migrating them, let's say in the voice side of things and the collaboration side of things. The story he's going to tell a little bit later in our presentation is going to be specific to some of the work he's done at Northeastern University. We chose that one just because of the proximity and the recency of that project, but a lot of experience, including a really interesting background in the mobility side of the space. He's been a founder, he's been a CEO, he's been a CTO. He's just a real pleasure to have on our team, somebody that I feel like I can bounce technical concepts off of and just enjoy having him around. And I think you'll enjoy the perspective he brings when he tells you a little bit about how he approached the Northeastern University project. Joel, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Jeff, thank you so much. No, the only piece I would add is I always say that I'm a tech guy that speaks human, which I think Jeff and I are similarly aligned there. So what I mean by that is let us worry about the technology. And that's really the key way that I approach every challenge with every customer is there. It could be overwhelming, especially when you're dealing with emerging technologies, which is my specialty. But really, we just look at what problem we're trying to solve, and then we work with you to make that happen. So leave the technology and the complexities to us, and we'll find the solution that's going to make the most sense in the long run.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. So we'll dive right into it. So really quickly, agenda. Here's what the next 50 or so minutes will look like, and we're going to leave some time at the end in case there are questions we want to respond to in the chat. So first off, we're going to start. Who are we? Why are we here? David did a great introduction, but I'll tell you a little bit about the company itself. Then we're going to dive right into the 5 technologies that I mentioned in the first slide. What is Microsoft 365 and sort of what is that ecosystem approach that Microsoft's taking? What is Teams? What is WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop? Also things around Zero Trust and Viva. Some of those are probably familiar words to folks on the call, and some of them might not be. So we'll try to give a little overview and then a little of the what's the use case, why should you care kind of thing. And then story time. And then Joel will take it away and tell, I think, an engaging story about his work at Northeastern. So really quickly, I'm not going to spend much time on this. It is not the focus of the presentation. Really, there's a lot of meat to get to. But who is Infused Innovations? We are headquartered here in Rhode Island. We are proud members of the community. Although we do have advisors, consultant staff in 14 states. So we are a virtual organization, so to speak, as it seems like most of us have become over the last year or so. But we take a security-first approach to everything we do. We don't implement technologies without understanding what the impact will be on a organization's security posture, what any risks could be associated with doing that. And we really have 3 focus areas. We don't try to be everything to everyone. We focus on secure, intelligent workplace, which is really our framework for delivering a lot of what we're going to talk about on this in this presentation. And then we have accelerators to help accelerate the adoption of various technologies. and we have advisory services to help coach people on how to make the most of the technologies that we're going to discuss today. Diving right in. All right, so starting right off the top, for anyone who's not familiar with Microsoft 365, and I'm guessing at this point most people probably are, I like to define it as sort of the new operating system, or it's a platform, it's an ecosystem, but I like to say the new operating system. You know, for a long time, you know, we thought of the operating system as a means to an end, right? We'd boot up our computers and, you know, Windows 7 or Windows XP or Windows 10 or whatever would appear. And it was a means to an end. Nobody booted up their computer because they loved using calculator or loved using Paint. They used it to get to line of business applications and information and collaboration and, you know, getting things done, right? It was a means to an end. I sort of think that Microsoft 365 takes that same approach in a cloud first, you know, methodology, but sort of has become operating system 2.0 for the business, right? There's a means to an end aspect of all these tools, whether they're on the productivity side of the stack, Office 365, for example, Teams, you know, things that we're going to talk about today. Whether it's on the flexibility side of the stack, right? I'm doing things on premise, I'm doing things in the cloud, I have a hybrid model, or, you know, security, right? Whether it's identity security, device security, data security, application security, whatever it might be. And, you know, while we're probably talking more from an organizational perspective today, you know, they have a multitude of SKUs, a multitude of packages that focus on pretty much any vertical, any size organization, and, you know, really even down to things like, you know, personal family use, that sort of stuff too. Joel, is there anything you wanted to add about the ecosystem approach that Microsoft sort of builds these as building on top of here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, to your point, it's the kind of thing where it continues to surprise me that when I start thinking about, and especially we dealt with this as we were working with companies and universities to help them adjust to, you know, working through the pandemic, that a lot of companies and universities sort of, you know, gravitated towards the latest shiny object as fast as they could. So they bought Zoom, they bought Slack, you know, they bought all these different things. And what continues to amaze me is how big this ecosystem really is. So it's either a Microsoft product or it's an integration that Microsoft has done into another product. You know, we'll talk a little bit later, but like Teams is basically becoming that centralized hub that pretty much integrates into everything now. So it's interesting because a lot of people think, oh, Office 365, email, calendar, contacts, they hear about SharePoint or they hear about, you know, OneDrive. They don't realize what it's all about. And certainly the security piece, which obviously is, you know, where we start, is another really big piece.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the sort of integrated, either first party or third party approach that Microsoft has taken. You know, I'm thinking back over the last, you know, 2 or 3 years. And, you know, I can't even count the number of integrations we've done where this isn't an exclusionary ecosystem, right? It's, you know, we've integrated with G Suite by a single sign-on and, you know, SAML and OAuth. We've integrated with Cisco. We've integrated with Okta and, you know, Duo. And I mean, there's so many integrations because everybody's got products that they use within their organizations today. This is around, you know, adding, you know, governance, around adding just a whole bunch of other things into that ecosystem. But you're right, it's absolutely not exclusionary. I'm glad you brought that.
Well, and I was just going to say, and I think it's changed a lot over the years. Like even when I think back in 2011, you know, when I was part of the founding team of Ubiquity, we gravitated towards the G Suite because of its extensibility and its customization opportunities. And now, if I were starting a company today, I would 100% look at the 365 Office Suite just because of my experience with really using Teams as that, you know, centralized entry point and all the security pieces.
Which is a perfect segue to the next slide, which is Teams, almost like that was planned. So you know, looking at the poll results, it looks like a large number of people certainly know what Teams is, and you know, we're using it right now, obviously. So that helps, but Teams is a lot of things. You know, obviously there's bullets on here. I'm not going to read you the bullets, but Teams, I would say, is so, many things. It's a lot more than just chat and video conferencing, which is what a lot of people sort of start with Teams on, right? A lot of organizations, pandemic hit, it was like, how do we stay in touch with people? Well, we have got Skype for Business, we have Teams, let's see what we can do there. Or, some meetings are in Zoom and some are in WebEx and some are in GoToMeeting and some are in Join Me and some are in, right? And then some are in Teams. And it just sort of feels like it makes its way into organizations in different ways. But I personally use it almost more for document collaboration in real time than I do, and communication with my team in a threaded way than I do for for some of those other use cases. But there are so many use cases, because what Microsoft is trying to do with Teams is really make it a hub for teamwork. It's supposed to be the place where an organization, whether in office, out of the office, disparate, whatever that might be, including elements of groups that are outside your organization, can collaborate in a governed and controlled and secure fashion. I'll give you a couple examples of ways people use Teams that you may not, it may not come to mind just immediately, but I'll give you a quick example. So, we've all got a bunch of third-party SaaS products in our organizations, I'm sure, places where you log in and you might get a couple email notifications during the day about things that are happening in that other platform or whatever it might be. I know we have a couple that we use in our line of business, and most organizations do. I can think of Salesforce, and I can think of a whole bunch on the EDU side of the space, and just other tools, right? Things that are their own ecosystem. And I was talking to a customer the other day, and they were telling me how they've got a bunch of people in their organization that use this tool. They all get email alerts during the day that tell them what's happening in the other platform, and then they go log into it and do their thing, and then they get another email alert and go log in and do their thing. And it's a pretty common workflow. And we were talking about ways to streamline that, make it a little bit more efficient. And even though that platform doesn't have a native integration with Teams, it is web-based. So, one thing we did was we created a team for the people that use that app and just pinned the app to the top so they could launch it right inside Teams in like a browser tab. But then we made it so the email notifications, instead of going to 15 different people, went into that channel. So all the notifications were visible in a threaded fashion, so they could start collaborating and say, are you taking that one? Are you doing this one? I'm going to do this one. And they could have rich collaboration around something that was previously just an email from a do not reply address, right? And it just, it made it a lot easier for there to be accountability, for there to just be this collaboration. And that was a tool that's not natively integrated with Teams. We had another customer that takes in Excel files to a shared mailbox, and they come from vendors and partners, and they're in a defined format. And again, it's the kind of thing, these come in via email, so you wouldn't necessarily think there's a great use for Teams or for other tools like maybe Power Automate or that sort of thing. But we take these files for them, automatically combine them together, automatically ingest them into Power BI, automatically then report into Teams. So instead of somebody having to watch a shared mailbox and action on this stuff and combine files manually and then give the data to somebody else, it's all happening in an automated fashion. And again, Teams becomes the conduit for the collaboration around that stuff, for the engagement around that stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to give maybe a couple use cases, but it's for communication, it's for workflow, data, dashboards, project planning. I know Erica from our team is on. We use Planner and other tools like OneNote inside of Teams to keep the entire group on the same page. Like I said, we have staff all over the country. And it's really an important thing for us. And I know, Joel, you did quite a bit of work with Teams, which you're going to talk about later on. And you're also involved in a big project right now. I think it's moving, 7,000 users to Teams from Cisco?
From Intrado. But I'll add one more piece to what you were saying about Teams. What I think is really great about it is you can really start with something just as simple as installing it and starting to send messages back and forth, and then evolve over time, because it's a very natural evolution. You can add more apps to it by clicking a button. You can suddenly attach a screenshot. You can do all the stuff that you could do with all the other, competitive products. So you can send silly little GIFs and make your own animated memes. I mean, so it's a very naturally evolving environment. So you can start with chat and then just continue to grow from there. And I'll take you through some other cases in a little bit, but it's pretty amazing what you can do with it. But I think again, the big power to me is the fact that it can start as simple as me sending a message to Jeff saying, "Hey," and then instantly attaching a Word doc, and then we're collaborating in real time on that Word doc. And we didn't have to click a bunch of settings and change a bunch of things around. It's inherently, inherits all the security settings and all the other pieces you have in place already.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for as much as we talk about things being cloud native and cloud first and available on any device in any place, we all still know that there are line of business apps that are Windows based or whatever they might be, but that need to be delivered to the end users. And this was especially noticeable during the last year, year or so, where it would be like, well, students can't easily get to a computer lab where these things might be installed, or they can't easily, they might have a Chromebook at home or something like that. But how do you deliver applications that might be Windows based or line of business applications in a secure way at scale, to anyone on any device in any place? And that's where Windows Virtual Desktop comes in. We're all familiar, I'm sure, with Citrix and VMware Horizon, or View it used to be, right? Or any of the DAS solutions, desktop as a service solutions that are out there. And for anyone who isn't aware of it, Microsoft's got a fully managed one as well. I remember the days when I used to do Horizon deployments, and you'd stand up your connection brokers and your security servers and your session hosts and you'd stand up this entire stack, and you'd have to manage it and support it, and then pay for it. The licensing wasn't always the most inexpensive either. And then along came WVD, where it's like 8 clicks and you're spinning up a Windows 10 image, and then you assign the users to it and they can open a browser and get to it, right? It's great because these sorts of tools, even though you're running Windows apps in them, line of business apps in them, you can get to them from a browser, you can get to them from a Chromebook, you can get to them from an iPad. I remember the first one, Phil's on from our side, and I'm sure he remembers this demo that we did. But we had a CEO at a large Boston organization that does a lot of product design and electrical engineering and like visual design. And we stood up a cluster for them, and the CEO was handed in a meeting an iPad, and on it was a GPU-backed Windows virtual desktop behind it. And in real time on an iPad, he was able to use, I don't remember the exact product, one of the 3D rendering products, in real time spinning around 30 frames per second on an iPad. And it was great, right? Because that application doesn't exist on the iPad. It exists as a GPU-bound Windows application. But it's just really interesting that you can take things in a way that makes it easy to deploy in a fully managed fashion, take things that used to tie people to expensive infrastructure or a lot of management and support, and deliver them in a managed fashion.
I'll just add one piece to that as you go to the next slide. Jeff and I talk about this a lot. So, the other great use cases are, especially, in our world, when you're working with different clients, is some clients are very particular about the levels of security, even though you've assured them that they are 100% secure and isolated and separated from others. So we can very easily have a remote desktop, virtual environment up and running. So in my case, my primary machine is a Mac, and I've got Windows machines at the ready, either with a browser or a secure connection with a Mac native, app by Microsoft, and it's as if I'm sitting here in front of a Windows machine. I mean, it's really pretty incredible.
Yeah, and you touched on security, Joel. Obviously being able to deliver all of this stuff in a secure fashion is really important. Zero trust is not a technology; it's really a philosophy or a framework, I guess I would say. The tenets of it, and I was going back and forth with Joel before this on, how do I describe zero trust in a way that makes sense? Obviously, there's a couple bullets on here that try to sum it up in a few ways, but I think the way I would describe it is, we're all familiar with, when you're in a court of law in the United States, the accused are innocent until proven guilty, right? You're deemed to be innocent until proven guilty. It's a tenet of our legal system. In a zero trust model, it's kind of interesting, but the opposite is true. Everything and everyone is considered suspect. They might be investigated and cross-checked until we can be sure it's safe to be allowed. And that's kind of a different way of thinking about things. But when staff are connecting from anywhere on any device at any time, and you don't know if their device was in a coffee shop or overseas a day earlier or a week earlier, you really have to think from a zero trust mindset if you want a safe and secure environment. When we look at failures inside a lot of organizations to stop cyber attacks, like especially things around like lateral movement of threats within a network, the traditional security model that enables that sort of lateral traversal or movement within an organization is that there oftentimes is this sense of trusting everything behind the firewall, right? It used to be that everything inside my firewall I trust, everything outside my firewall I don't trust, and that is a philosophy that probably will not stand the test of time in a cloud-first and remote world. And zero trust just sort of flips that on its head. It's basically the organizational framework of the security framework that says instead of the firewall being around your borders, the firewall is around every user's identity. The firewall is around every device. The firewall is around the data and policies associated with the data through things like universal labeling and a whole bunch of other things. But it's really a very interesting way of thinking about things. There are 4 primary tenets or pillars of zero trust. This is maybe getting a little bit more in the weeds, but I'll just mention the 4 pillars and then we can maybe go on from there in a less technical fashion. But strong user identification and access policies is one of the primary keys of zero trust. In the Microsoft ecosystem, that might be Azure Active Directory, but we're all familiar with multi-factor authentication. Conditional access is what this screenshot shows, where you're really taking in signals and verifying every access. But that all starts with strong user identification. Also, things like segmentation of data and resources is a really important tenet of zero trust. If you can segment your data and your resources, then you can use things like information protection policies, data leakage prevention, and other products and other tools to sort of contextualize the data and control access to it, or what can be done with the data after access has been granted. The third of the 4 pillars of zero trust is a strong data security and storage and transfer methodology, whether it's encrypting your endpoints, using virtualization-based security, using trusted platform modules in your hardware purchases, VPNs, encryption of machines and data and all those sorts of things. That's a really important tenet as well. And the last one is having appropriate security orchestration. Right, it's not just about having antivirus on the endpoint. There's this whole concept of the security onion, the layered approach. It's called defense in depth. But it's basically saying I need to be protecting the endpoint, the server, the network. I need to be collecting logs and telemetry. I might be wanting to understand what my users are doing from a cloud app security perspective, right? What other third-party apps are they accessing? What other SaaS tools are they using? Are they ones that we control or don't control? Are they copying data to Dropbox? Well, Dropbox isn't on our corporate standards or our organizational policies. Different organizations are obviously going to have different approaches here, but the fact is there's an ecosystem approach, and zero trust is a great place to start that conversation. So, sorry, that was a little bit long-winded. Joel does probably a better job of the actual human side of it.
Well, I'll add a piece, and you can tell us which pillar it falls in. So what was interesting is we had created a PowerPoint to share with a client, and we put it up on Teams in a shared team, so that our external client could access our controlled team. And for whatever reason, they couldn't open it. We could. We looked everywhere we could possibly think of, all the permissions on Teams, everything. What we finally realized, and only because I went old school and just tried to look at the actual data properties, was that it was actually, it was classified as an internal use only PowerPoint template. So here I was, as a user thinking that everything was fine, opening it up, no problem. but when you tried to open it up and you weren't authenticated as Infused, it would give you all these errors. So it was fantastic because, you know, that would have been a call to go and talk to someone who's technical, which is exactly what you want. You don't want someone to be able to try and figure out a way around the security policies that were in place. So it was completely transparent to me that I thought it was actually a problem with Teams, and it actually was the file itself.
Yeah, and that's universal labeling, right? So that's the ability for an organization to set policies, labels that apply to documents, and those can be applied automatically. Like, we see a social security number in this document, we're going to put a sensitive label on it. Or it could happen because somebody classified a document a specific way. In this case, Joel had copied a PowerPoint deck that was an internal deck, had changed it, you know, which was great. And then, but the label persisted. And a really good use case we can probably all identify with is, picture the CFO of the organization. They've got this Excel file they've been working on. It's got sensitive internal information in it, right? Not unheard of for the CFO. They go to email it to someone in the organization, right? They go to email it to Bill in accounting, and they accidentally email it to bill@customer.com, right? And, you know, it's happened before. We've done autocompletes wrong in Outlook and sent the wrong file to the wrong person. And, you know, what did you used to have to do? Frantically call them and tell them to delete it, or ask the IT department, can we recall that email, or whatever, right? But with universal labeling, that file would have already been classified as, well, it's a protected document, it's got sensitive information, and it's being edited by the CFO. So that same story of the file being in somebody's inbox outside the organization, well, you'd think they can just double click on that file and open it, right? It's in their inbox, but actually they would be blocked from opening that file, even though it's in their inbox, because when they double click on it, it would ask them to authenticate as either the CFO or somebody in the organization that has the same permissions as the CFO to access that data. And that's true of things like USB keys, right? You know, picture times you take the train down to New York City for a meeting, whatever it might be, you've got a USB key with some information on it or whatever, and you leave it on the seat of the train, and now what happens? You're worried about all the data that might have been on that USB key. You're asking yourself, is it encrypted, or, you know, it's not encrypted, oh no, what's going to happen? The sensitive documents on that, even though in an offline state, you'd think someone could take it, plug it into their computer, and just read it. Even in offline state, it will then verify, does this person have the rights to access this document? And if it's not sure, it will require an internet connection to verify that document before it allows it to be opened. So it's a really interesting platform. Again, it takes this ecosystem approach, but universal labeling is that example that Joel was giving there.
And again, it's like transparent. I think that's probably the best part about it. Like, you would think, and you've seen it before, and we've got it instituted and Infused as well, that when you send an email, you classify it accordingly. But the fact that even just at the get-go, the fact that at the document level, I'm creating a document, I'm using the template that's internal, and that's really the only thinking I have to do. There's no other things I have to flip. There's no other switches. And I think that that's really where a lot of this stuff has come a long way, because it's secure and it's incredibly technical, but to the user, they don't have to know anything. All they have to know is, which template did I pick?
Great. And, you know, it's funny because as you're talking about sort of what the end user experience is, or what that actual feel for the end user might be, that really is a great segue into Viva. And Viva it's classified as an employee experience platform, but it's really made up of four features, four elements. So there's Viva Connections, Viva Learning, Viva Topics, and Viva Insights. Viva Connections is a single entry point for employee engagement. Think like an old intranet that you might have had, but also for internal communications as well. It's a place where staff can collaborate and communicate. It's, you know, obviously we're all familiar with the Teams conversation at this point, but it's basically a place for employee engagement. It can help sort of reinforce some of the cultural aspects of an organization, or embrace them, is probably a better way of saying it. And then you've got Viva Learning. Viva Learning is basically a hub for training your organization, whether it's training courses, micro-learning content. Those could be just small snippets, and we prepare a lot of micro-learning content at Infused for our customers. I saw some that Joel and his team was working on just, I think it was last week, short 2-minute video snippets for a customer to help them do various tasks, feel more comfortable with those, little micro learning content. And that's Viva Learning. But again, it's a place, a single hub that allows for that sort of employee engagement that goes well beyond, sending an employee to some class. It's much more integrated into the employee's experience as part of the staff. Viva Topics takes company-wide content and expertise and uses machine learning to basically curate that information so anyone in the organization can find answers more quickly. It's really fascinating what they're doing with Viva Topics. But basically, we all have information locked in various places in our organization, right? Some stuff might be in SharePoint, some stuff might be in, Word documents and, a whole bunch of other places. And Viva Topics tries to basically create a Wikipedia style database for your company using machine learning to find all these content, the linkage between them, similarities and layout, and try to bring all of that intelligence and knowledge and information to the forefront so people can find answers more quickly and figure out who they reach out to if they have a question about something. Who's the subject matter expert in X? Well, instead of searching through the employee directory, you might ask Viva that question. And then Viva Insights is a data-driven, privacy-focused insight platform to support well-being and productive work. So this is all about how are we working, both pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic. There's been a lot of insight, and I read some really interesting studies over the last few months about this, but there's been really interesting insights about how employees work and what sort of work they do and what sort of experience that has, both for them, but also for their families and what that means. So a really interesting stuff coming out of Microsoft on the whole employee engagement and experience side of things. All right, now the moment everybody, sorry, I teased Joel there for a second. I thought I was jumping right to Joel, but actually I guess I'll say, sorry, Joel. So first off, why do we care about all that stuff Jeff just spent half an hour talking about? So I would say at a high level, employees, students, and staff are expecting more, like full stop. They're expecting more fulfilling experiences, more enriching work, more meaningful interactions. There are expectations that your organization will do these things for them because as a consumer, they can do those things. They can download an app onto their phone. They can find a third-party service on the internet to do something. As a consumer, they can do those things, and it takes them like 5 minutes, right? It's no skin off anyone's back. But staffs are questioning why their companies can't offer them similar experiences. Now, obviously, me saying that brings up a lot of things. Security, certainly, shadow IT, right? What is the staff doing that's outside of the purview of the organization? So this ecosystem approach adds the governance, the framework, the security to that conversation. But collaboration can't be hard or people just won't do it, right? It can't be hard or people won't do it. So this is a call to action, in my opinion. This is a call to action that if you're not using these technologies today or you want to experience them, you want to do a proof of concept of something, just ask, just reach out to Mark, reach out to us. Reach out, through OSHEAN, do whatever you need to do, but there are so many ways to experience these technologies. And Joel's going to be talking about one of those in a minute. But Joel, I want you to comment on this slide too.
Yeah, I think a big thing is, and this came out years ago, and I think it's going to really surface again now that people start trying to go back into their offices, was they were actually, when they surveyed younger people in the work environment, they were actually looking for companies that were more progressive because they felt like Big Brother was watching, Big Brother was limiting everything they could do. They wanted that freedom. And that's really, Jeff mentioned shadow IT. That's really where it all started coming from. And if you think about what happened when the pandemic hit, no matter what, and there's so many companies, even clients of ours, no matter what they had in place, because people had been so used to using Zoom on the consumer side, they forced companies to invest in Zoom. So what happened? I think everybody knows Zoom was not secure, was hacked multiple times. They promised to be overhauling their entire security posture, and then they ended up buying a security company. right? And then everyone learned from everyone else. Like Microsoft Teams, I've never seen so many innovations come faster in a platform. Microsoft Teams started removing things, making it easier to to sign on and experience things. But long story short, to Jeff's point, the ease of use that they have as a consumer is something that they want to have. But if you don't give it to them, they're going to find ways around it. They're going to start forwarding their work emails, and they're going to start forwarding their work docs. So they're going to work with their work docs on their home PCs because they have more flexibility. So they have an expectation, and I think these days we can deliver that expectation while also keeping our environment and our clients' environments as secure as our clients need them to be.
And that brings us into the Northeastern University case study, which I have on the slide here as it's sort of an exploration of communication, collaboration, flexibility, but really an exploration of, and I'm starting to hate this term, the new normal. So Joel, take it away, and
Sure.
I will flip the next slide for you.
Sure. So I'll take you on a journey. So I was brought into Northeastern University by the CIO. We shared a common vision of very similar to what I was just talking about, of these days with technology where it is, why is it so difficult to communicate and collaborate? And then take it to another step, communicate and collaborate with anyone at any time, on anywhere, on any device. So when I first got to Northeastern, I was asked to put together the strategy as I was working with him. And I did a quick site survey and just started looking around at the technology that was in place. This is pre-COVID. You can see from the timeline, March 2019. So I'm going in and out in their office environments as well as in their classrooms. But let's just focus on the office environments for a second, given the audience here. And it was unbelievable because the stories I had heard before I actually started exploring were that these conference rooms had antiquated AV equipment, and that's why people aren't using the stuff that's at play. And what blew my mind is it was far from antiquated, it was state of the art. But in some cases, it was really more about the installation. So someone would go in, and I'm sure everyone can tell these same stories. They'd go into this conference room, very well-equipped conference room, and they would have technical frustration. They would plug their laptop in because they suddenly wanted to present, and they were able to present, but no one could hear them. And why? Because in some cases, the HDMI cable wasn't carrying audio, or there wasn't a camera underneath the monitor, and they were expecting there to be a camera there. So little things like that, and I think they really end up growing more and more over time, where people will just walk into a room, get frustrated, and then just not use it. So the most common thing I saw as I was going around were people sitting in conference rooms, but actually doing a video conference from their laptop, even though they were, sitting in a room that probably had like $50,000 worth of AV equipment. So what was happening with Northeastern also is they were working on rolling out Microsoft Teams. They weren't doing Teams calls yet, but they were doing the communication and collaboration like we were talking about earlier. And there was an initiative that they were looking at doing, and they had been running a pilot for a while of using Microsoft Teams calls and sort of transitioning to that environment. So as I got a little bit more involved, they actually asked me to come on and lead the entire initiative, not just put the strategy together. And again, my main goal was really to make it so that people could effortlessly communicate and collaborate. We also at the time were playing around with the original Surface Hub. The Surface Hub 2 had been rumored, so we were looking at that. If you're not familiar with it, it's in both pictures here, but the close-up is on the bottom right. And it really is, a rolling station that allows you to do communication and collaboration from anywhere using Microsoft Teams. In this case, it was shipping with a Surface Hub OS. These days, you can also put Windows 10 on it. When it's a Hub OS, it's a great collaboration device that can be managed effectively, and it's a Teams device. So you can imagine doing virtual whiteboarding and pretty much anything you can imagine. And as I stated in the slide here, I've talked about communication and collaboration, from anywhere at any time. One of my first experiences when I really was getting into it and trying to figure out what the future could be at Northeastern, it actually happened almost by accident. I was in Wellesley, Mass. I just had a breakfast meeting. Somebody called me. I was on the phone with them. They said they wanted to share a document with me. So we changed it to a Teams call. I was sitting outside on a park bench on my iPhone, And he was walking me through a Word doc, which then I was collaborating with him on in real time using my iPhone. Then he shared a whiteboard. It's harder to do a whiteboard on an iPhone, but we were communicating and collaborating that way too. So it gave me a very early, entry into it, and a lot of very exciting things that I saw were going to be possible going forward. And the nice thing is, as you can see, I've sort of listed all the different devices there. It pretty much really was opening up the world for us to put it anywhere. So very exciting time, really exciting stuff. And I had worked with them to also write up a whole business plan. The plan was to take a bunch of these Surface hubs and disperse them across the campus and even globally, just so that everyone would get a firsthand experience and be able to get excited about what this future could be. So that was in parallel with working on taking them from their desktop antiquated phone system to Microsoft Teams and enjoying that whole experience. So next slide. So the world was wonderful, magical, and rosy, and everybody was in person, and the focus was really on everybody's in person with some people that are remote. So how do you extend to the remote user and make sure that they have the best experience? So I mentioned the technology challenges. The other challenge, and we see this a lot with clients, is it's a cultural challenge. It's a cultural change. And I think we're going to see the reverse of what I've been working with for years, which is the remote participant was always a secondary. And I think what we're going to see as people start going back into the offices, the remote person is going to be the primary. So we're going to have a flip. And the good thing is that all the technology that we've invested in, or all the technology that's out there today, can actually support that flip. But we were all excited about how do we engage and how do we do all this stuff where the primary person is in person, but then COVID hit. So what did we do when COVID hit? Next slide, please. So our timeline obviously was smack in the middle of it. So we were right in the middle of the Teams calls migration. We were right in the middle of rolling out these Surface hubs and Surface Pros and Goes and really enhancing this whole experience everywhere. So, the first thing we had to do was we had to retool, and then we had to adapt, and we had to innovate. So, thankfully, Microsoft partner relationships. We worked with a company called Red Thread, which is a absolutely fantastic AV vendor that really helped us with anything I needed. But really what we were focused on was, and as my bullets here say, we had to embrace hybrid and we had to do it fast. We didn't know what was going to happen next. I was fortunate because Northeastern was ahead of the curve, and I was on a number of calls around the region with other universities and other companies. So I can tell you for a fact that we were ahead of the curve. The planning happened way before anyone else was really doing the emergency planning of what this new world was going to look like and how we were going to handle things. So we embraced hybrid as fast as we could. We really looked at a lot of the different processes. Just to give you an idea, when we were doing the migration to Teams calls, we gave people an opportunity to choose what type of headset they wanted instead of a desk phone. And when they were still in the office, they were really wanting a desk phone. But as soon as they went home, they started realizing that they, were using whatever they could, in some cases just even using the PC's microphone and speaker. So we had to now figure out how we were going to get headphones and headsets to people wherever they might be. So we streamlined and automated our processes. And, Jeff was talking about Microsoft Teams and the Microsoft ecosystem. We used Microsoft Flow, we used Power Automate, we used Power BI so we could track everything that was going on. We had communication and collaboration running in a variety of different teams so people would know where things were at every given moment. We set it up and hooked in our external hardware vendors so we could see in real time some of the shipping status. So really streamlined and automated processes. When you're suddenly in a remote world, which, as Jeff mentioned, I've had a couple of companies of my own that I founded, and a number of them have been all virtual. So I'm no stranger to working remote, but when you're working with people that were so used to primarily being in the office, and you have to teach them how to now work effectively remotely with the complications of, like Jeff mentioned, a 5-year-old suddenly wandering in the room, you really have to retool a lot of your processes and figure out things that you were taking for granted, where a person would come in, sit at their desk uninterrupted and do X, Y, and Z. How can you now take a step back and automate that process? In the case of Northeastern, we had to turn hotels and other rooms into classrooms. So again, the power of Microsoft Teams, we just needed to have an internet connection, and we knew that we were, secure and authenticated the way we needed to be. So this, in the case of COVID, it really accelerated everything for us. It twisted it a little bit, but it gave us a chance to, adapt and innovate. And the communication and collaboration and experience project I mentioned, rolling out all the different Surface Hubs, those Surface Hubs were now reclassified. And as you can see in the pictures, they were used as a way to connect to existing AV systems that were in these giant conference rooms that were never supposed to be classrooms that suddenly turned into classrooms. And again, thankfully, being part of the Microsoft ecosystem and partner programs, we were very early on, and we're fortunate to be able to put Windows 10 on the Surface Hub, one of the first ones to be able to do that. So we got to see what that experience could be, and it really helped us when we needed to install a bunch of other, classroom-specific pieces of software. So Jeff mentioned the new normal. I also was not a big fan of the term, but it couldn't be any more appropriate. Because what I'm seeing happen at a really rapid pace, which is exciting, is I thought it was going to be a while before people started going back into their offices, even with a vaccine. I just thought that people had now invested, and corporations had invested in giving people the setup that they needed to have to be successful at home. That I thought it would take a while to bring people back into offices. But what I started to realize is there are people, a lot of like different folks, including VPs, who are sitting down in their basement using their old kitchen table and an old dining room chair, and that's how they're having conference calls. So when a VP or a senior VP has that experience at home, then it usually accelerates people going back into an office because they want back in, and if they want back in, they want their team back in. So it's interesting, right? But what I think is interesting here, and I'm showing a classroom setting of the future, but there's we can certainly reach out to us, and we'll be happy to take you through some of the innovations that are happening on the furniture side with a company called Steelcase, who I've had the privilege of working with. But when you think about it, in a world like today, a traditional conference room, you would never see all those monitors in the back on the wall, right? But this is an example of, like I mentioned, the flip. Your primary is remote, your secondary is in person. So how do you really improve that experience so that, as a presenter, I'm seeing people's faces, either as a teacher or a presenter, or if I'm in a meeting and I'm conducting a meeting? Gone will be the days of, oh, did we dial into the bridge? Is everybody on? Because there won't be a way to get away from it. You're going to walk into a room that's going to be lined with monitors and communication mechanisms that basically show you that hybrid is ready to go and waiting for you. And I really think that is effectively the new normal. So what we've been doing with a lot of our clients is when COVID hit, people allocated money they didn't ever think they needed to allocate, and they bought as fast as they could to make sure that their business could survive. So what we've been doing now is we've been working with our clients to take a step back. And that's why I have assess, plan, and innovate. You take a step back, let us assess what you have in place today. Do you have a lot of redundancies? You probably do. Are there processes that need to be redone and streamlined? I would guess so. Are there a lot of cost savings to be had? 100%. And there's nothing wrong with what you've done because you did what you needed to do. But now we have an opportunity to take a step back, assess what we have, put a real plan in place. My favorite thing, especially with emerging technology, is to build out proofs of concept. So if you want to try out some new technology, it doesn't mean you have to allocate hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. We can take one room in your office or one specific workflow that you'd like to see whether or not it could be automated, and we do a proof of concept on it, and that doesn't cost a lot of money. And then the final piece is, and again, because I am the emerging technology guy, and this is my favorite spot to play in, don't be afraid to innovate. There's so many new fun ways of looking at things that may have looked like a mundane process. I'll give you a case in point. Something as mundane as cutting and pasting inside of an Excel doc. I just put together a process that streamlined and probably saved somebody 4 hours a day just by doing some quick little, automation. And that was something that was unheard of previously. But again, if you're not afraid to innovate or do something interesting and exciting, then this is the chance to do it, especially as we come into this new normal and people start coming back into offices, and we learn from the efficiencies that in a lot of cases we've gained by having to work in this new environment.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, so, I know we're at the end of the time, and we want to be respectful of everybody's schedules, and absolutely appreciate the time that you took to spend with us today on these topics. As David said at the beginning, there's a collaborative approach in many of these things, right? You need bandwidth, you need secure access to connectivity to do these sorts of things effectively and efficiently. That's where OSHEAN has always excelled. And we do sort of that, not the same last mile that OSHEAN does, but the last mile from the user's keyboard to the monitor to them, right? So, the advisory services side of things, right, helping you plan your journey and figure out where you could be going as an organization. Accelerators to help accelerate the implementation and enablement of the user communities that you serve. And then any managed services to help you maintain and support it. Those are the things that we focus on, as I said at the beginning, and reach out if you have any additional questions about it. We'd love to have a conversation with you. The most fun we have is having these conversations in small groups and just talking about what's possible. So thank you again very much to OSHEAN, David for the kind introductions, and Mark always being a good partner, and Namoda. I will throw it back over to you. So thank you again.
Oh, thanks so much. Dave, do you have any parting words before we?
Well, if you've got a couple of minutes, there's a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going from the bottom up, but Brian McDonald asked about Surface Hub's pricing versus other stuff, and an interesting question about people actually touching surfaces these days, and whether or not people want to do that.
So there,
yep.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so there's a bunch of different options. The Surface Hub is sort of a nice all-in-one solution that you can roll in, but there are Teams rooms. There's a variety of different products by Logitech and Lenovo and a whole bunch of others. And the nice thing is, we keep talking about Teams, but the nice thing is that there's a lot of interoperability now. So if you invest in the Teams ecosystem, I always call it Teams first, but not Teams only. So if you do see that a Surface Hub potentially is prohibitive, there's a lot of other solutions out there. And that's why, again, taking that step back and assessing what you have, it's easy to think, oh, I'll just buy all new, but you don't necessarily have to buy all new. There's a lot of different options for taking advantage of the existing AV that's in place today to take it to the next level. The other thing, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to what you said that, depending on the use case, it may be not important at all to have a Surface Hub in the mix. We've seen schools use Surface Go devices, at a one-to-one sort of student, at the price of a Chromebook sort of thing. And, everyone's got their own little pen-sensitive tablet that they can work on and use. Yeah, Joel's holding one. I've got my Surface Pro X sitting, right here. And
well, that's what I was just going to say. So this is what I've seen a lot of now, is taking advantage of whatever AV equipment is in place today, but like I could join the same meeting from my iPad, and I do this all the time because I was so used to using a Surface Hub when I was working with the Northeastern folks, that the people I'm working with now are so used to me working with a whiteboard all the time. So I recently started joining meetings with my iPad as a secondary device and basically whiteboarding on the iPad.
I'm fascinated by the use case idea, because even at a tech savvy organization such as OSHEAN, and we were early users of Planner, and we got into Teams, almost right away, and all of that kind of thing. That Dave struggles with Dave's use case at the CEO level versus my senior staff's use case versus an individual engineer or my controller, right? So those use cases are all very different, and the way that I want to know everything that's going on, right? But I have to have some measure of dashboard that extrapolates the things that I need to see, and And that's not obvious in Teams yet, right? So you sit there and you're just like, well, I'm on, I've got, a million teams and that kind of thing with all the different things that we do. But it's very hard to go in and then, because then everybody would have to tag and prioritize the way from a social perspective. And people just don't do that, right? Because their use case is not for me, right? It's for them, right? And I'm interested in that evolution, because I'll give an example. One of the great things that we went into, when it came out was, LastPass, right? So we got everybody to use LastPass. LastPass is my browser now. Well, you guys were just talking about, well, Teams should kind of be your browser. Well, I wouldn't want Teams to be my browser unless it was integrated with LastPass, right? And so then you turn around and you get sort of jumbled up a little bit, right? And then we overlay Duo on everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think at this stage of having really great tools, you mentioned the automation side of things and Power Automate and all those different things, but I think that is really where the mystery lies for us. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll go first on this one, and then I'm sure Joel's got some comments as well. But you're right. I mean, if you think of Teams as sort of the hub for teamwork, and then you think of some of the other things we mentioned, whether it's Power BI for reporting and dashboards, or Power Automate for automation and workflows, or using Microsoft Edge as a browser, which integrates with LastPass, but also pushes information. It allows for rich interaction with first and third party products, or using Defender on the endpoint as your security product, which helps enforce with conditional access challenges, which means less challenges in Duo or other MFA products like that. So there's actually, when I say ecosystem approach, I'm very mindful of the things you're talking about, the first party, third party integrations, facts that other organizations use other tools, right? Lots of organizations have many tools. I think the thing I would say is that this is why digital transformation has become both a buzzword and a really positive, forward-looking thing. But I would say guided digital transformation, right? Digital transformation for the sake of doing it, right? Like, here's a couple tools, they look good, they solve a use case, let's just roll them all out. That gets to what Joel was saying about the whole step back and assess, right? Then the digital transformation strategy becomes, where are we going in 12 months, 24 months, 36 months? What's the low-hanging fruit for automation? What reports and KPIs do I really need on a real-time fashion? How do I bring that data to me? And then things like Viva for finding the sources of intelligence in an organization and bringing them to the right spot, so you're not looking through 40 teams or 500 channels or whatever it might be. So you're coming across loud and clear on that point. It's something we've done a lot of advisory work on over the last 6 to 12 months, is which tools are the right tools? How do they integrate? How do they enforce or enable workflow and automation? And how do we chart a roadmap and a path for an organization to embrace those things for the sake of the users and for the sake of making the organization better?
Well, and for the sake of not overwhelming the CEO, like, so because I'll sit there, I really liked, not do a commercial for Doug and for my organization, and Kim, who did a couple of sessions on the 3 things that you can do inside of email security, right? That are free and you can do them, and they're low-hanging fruit, like you say, and they move the ball. I really hope that anybody on this call realizes that this is a never-ending and at times can be overwhelming thing called digital transformation, and we tend to get that paralysis and not do anything. But I like this idea of give me 3 things to do now, right? That will move the ball, and sometimes we miss that. But I started talking, and now we're over the time, so.
I could talk all day. I will.
I was just going to say, I'm always happy to have the conversation.
Yep.
That's okay. We appreciate everybody joining us this morning. Just as a quick reminder, today's session has been recorded, so we'll be sure to share that with you in the next couple of days. And as always, if you guys have any suggestions or recommendations for sessions, send a note over to the OSHEAN team, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Joel. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for having us.
Bye.